get into another interesting conversation right now, and this is in matters to do with debt. For every 100 shillings that the government collected in the first 5 months of the current financial year, 59 shillings was used to pay salaries, pensions and interest on debts. Data from the Central Bank of Kenya shows that while tax revenue grew by about 9% between July and November 2017, expenditure on the three items increased by 16% in the same period. The government collected about 1.4 trillion shillings and 118.8 billion more than in the same period in the 2016-17 financial year, when 1.3 trillion was collected. However, expenditure on wages, debt repayment and pensions went up by a whooping 859.6 billion shillings in the first 5 months of the current financial year, compared to 741 billion shillings in the same period last year. Why is this the case? We now want to bring in Dominic Omondi, who is our senior writer with the Standard newspaper, joining us from our City Centre studios. Many thanks for joining us, Dominic. Indeed, an interesting time for Kenya's debt to GDP ratio is pegged at about 51%, and a lot of revenue coming through. As much as the taxman has been able to sort of improve tax collection, most of it is going to pay debt. Why is the case?
Abby, thank you for having me. I'm normally really excited having a conversation around issues on public finance. But going back to the issue at hand really here, we are seeing a situation where our total expenditure is growing faster than our tax revenue. The reason being that we seem to be incurring more expenditure in terms of payment on interests on debts. Meaning we took more debts over the last 5 years. That has been the trend. The norm rather than the exemption. Our wage bill is also growing. You realize that the civil servants, though the government is not hiring or promoting, but there has been an agitation for people to get more pay, and that has culminated in increased wage bill. But you also have a situation where even the pension, the payment to the pension scheme is also going up, because you have a situation where more and more people are retiring, and that means more of the pension bill. The net effect is that while we are growing our taxes, our recurrent expenditure, because these are expenditures that you have to keep on paying, like every time you need to be paying all these, the money on the pension, the money on interest on debts, the wages, is going up. And this is worrying, because it then limits the amount of money that we remain with, funds that we remain with, that we can use in other development-oriented expenses or even other expenses. That means then we will continue borrowing for us to do any development projects.
Interesting picture, Dominic. Looking at Kenya right now, the government has also been quite, should I say, taken a strong stand, saying that the debt that the country has taken up is meant for development expenditure, and this will be eventually trickling down to the average Kenyans. But really, are we borrowing more than we need for now, or is it a question of how fast are we able to sweat the investments we've made so that they can be able to start paying fruits for the Kenyans?
That's an interesting question, because it's a question that really divides even the economists themselves. They don't seem to agree as to whether our total debt stock is sustainable or not. But the point is that in the medium term, of course, there are projects that when you put in place in the long run, you're going to have the multiplier effect, meaning that for every 1 shilling that you borrowed and put into a certain project, you are going to get more from that shilling. And that really is something that, take for example the SGR, which most economists are divided. Some are saying that it is not going to be possible for SGR to even pay itself as much as some people have made us to believe it's going to pay us earlier. Whereas there are others who says this is the game changer. We are going to see increase in movement, open up the country, movement of goods, movement of raw materials and all that, and that is going to culminate into increased GDP. And thus with the increased GDP, of course, you can get more taxes and all that to be able to pay back. The issue really here is what kind of loans do we have, debt do we have? Most economists are of the opinion that we are taking loans that are more expensive and that need to be paid in a shorter period of time. That means that in a few years, like in 2019, so many debts are going to be maturing. That means more of the money that we are going to collect is going to go into debts, and that is going to put pressure on our fiscal space, really, and it will leave us with little that we can use for development projects.
And Dominic, just picking off from your sentiments, the IMF is on record saying that Kenya's debt-to-GDP ratio is not sustainable and Kenya needs to slow down on its insatiable appetite for borrowing. On the flip side, we're also seeing the Treasury maintaining that we need to be active in the international markets so that we can have a good standing when it comes to borrowing, in the sense that we did see a couple of years ago where Kenya floated a Eurobond. And Henry Rotich has also been on record saying that the current debt levels are manageable and we are not at a debt distress sort of situation. Perhaps what is the accurate position on this?
Again, I wouldn't say there is an accurate position, but there are contestations depending on where one stands. But the general view, the general sentiment, even coming from the government, is that of a government that is sort of backpedaling from the boisterous position that they tended to take back in time, like 2-3 years ago. Now the reality seems to be sinking in, and people from the central bank governor to Henry Rotich, the National Treasury CS, the reality is that the fiscal space is narrowing. IMF was not as vocal as it is today on the debt issue and the sustainability of the debt issue. That voice has since gone up, and you hear this from the World Bank. And the talk now is that we need to undertake some fiscal consolidation. We need to cut on our expenditures, especially expenditures on non-essential, or even we need to reduce on wastage of resources and all that. We also need to grow our tax base to widen it, or probably even take it to find a way of taxing the informal sector so that the tax base is wider. Even the issue of us going back to the international market, really, we are going to the international market, and most economists, we spoke to Razia Khan, and her position was that we need to go back to the international market, not really because we want to use that to spend on development projects, but because we need to repay some of the debts that are due, are going to be due in the next 1 or so years. So our going back to the market again, talk of the syndicated loan that we've just issued, we've just received some 77 billion, that is supposed to actually pay back another syndicated loan that was due in October. At the same time, you talk of the Eurobond, and much of it is going to actually be used to pay back some loans or some interest that, some principal that is going to be due. So the whole idea of going to the international market again is a way of us trying to repay. It's a refinancing plan, really, where you are borrowing from Peter to pay wherever, John or wherever, and whether that is putting some pressure on our fiscal capability is your guess. Most people are divided as to whether refinancing should be seen as a way that is putting pressure on a country's fiscal position.
And finally, Dominic, what is the way forward in regard to ensuring that Kenya sort of tries to balance her debt position? Because at the end of the day, Kenyans want infrastructure to be fixed. They want to pay cheaper for basic items. And all across Africa, most governments are pumping in heavy resources in infrastructural upgrades and infrastructure development at large. So what is the way forward in the sense that a government does not want to overburden its citizens with high taxes? And on the other side of it, they have to bridge the deficit from taxes collected with external debt so as to be able to execute their projects?
For us, I think that answer is sort of a no-brainer. A no-brainer in the sense that we as a country, we have a lot of money that goes to waste. It's just wasted on some non-essential expenditures, like people just flying around. Some expenditures in government really, in my estimate, in my own opinion, like 10 to 20% is just goes into waste. And if we can cut on those wastage, we can go a long way in really consolidating our fiscal position. On the other hand, we also, on the revenue collection side, we need to do more in terms of ensuring that people that don't pay tax, KRA needs to be active, it needs to be aggressive, it needs to go after tax cheats. And ensure that everyone is paying what they're supposed to pay. I don't know how they are going to do it, but they also need to find a way of taxing the informal sector. This is really difficult. I know they talked of the presumptive taxation that they're supposed to introduce, where you assume that your sales are going to be this much, and so we are going to peg your tax at this much, like 5% of your presumed sales. So they need, like one economist put it, they need to burn the candle from both sides, and they need to do it very well. They need to cut on unnecessary expenditure, and they need to be aggressive on their tax collection position. If more people collect, if more people are paying their taxes, then you are in a position to say, well, we can bring down the taxation, rather than the situation that we have now, where a few people are paying taxes, and that means taking the maximum from these few people, and this really is hurting the taxpayers.
Many thanks, Dominic Omondi, giving us some breakdowns on the state of debt of the country, and of course, even the financial system. From the dependent analysts have been maintaining that Kenya needs to take up a very tight rope when it comes to balancing debt and, of course, financing infrastructure. Quite an interesting place to be for Kenya's economy. Well, we want to take a quick commercial break. We'll be coming back with some interesting stories, including some new stoves that have been built by Samsung that will be sold in the country and refugee camps at large. All that after the break.